You walked into this moment thinking the world changed. It didn't. The noise is still there. The fake smiles are still there. The endless demands. The people pulling at your energy. The voices telling you who to be. They never disappeared. Something else changed. You stopped begging for attention. You stopped chasing every opinion thrown at you. Now your mind feels different, quieter, sharper, dangerous, in a way people can't explain. And when people can't understand your peace, they start testing it. People think peace is soft. They imagine it as sitting somewhere quiet, escaping from problems, hiding from the world, like someone who gave up. That's the illusion. Peace is expensive. Peace costs people. Peace costs habits. Peace costs versions of yourself you spent years building. And most people never pay that price because chaos feels familiar to them. Chaos becomes a home. They complain about drama, then run back to it. They say they hate stress, then invite it into their lives with open arms. Watch carefully. The moment you begin protecting your peace, people start acting strange. Suddenly they ask why you changed. Suddenly they miss the version of you that answered every message instantly. The version that tolerated disrespect. The version that stayed available for everyone, while slowly disappearing inside. Funny how that works. Nobody complains when you're sacrificing yourself. Nobody questions it when you stay awake, carrying everyone else's weight. But the second you protect your own mind, now you're different. Different. That word makes people uncomfortable because it usually means they lost access to you. You start realizing not everybody deserves a seat in your head. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every argument deserves your energy. People throw their problems into your hands and expect you to carry them like they belong to you. They throw negativity into rooms and wonder why the air feels heavy. They spread noise because silence scares them. Silence is dangerous. Not dangerous because it hurts people. Dangerous because it reveals things. When everything gets quiet, you start hearing the truth. You hear the lies you kept telling yourself. You hear the excuses. You hear the voice that spent years buried under distractions. Most people avoid silence because they know exactly what waits there, themselves. And that meaning isn't comfortable. Protecting your peace means becoming selective. Selective with conversations. Selective with environments. Selective with who gets your time and who only gets distance. Because energy moves. Spend enough time around bitterness, and eventually, bitterness starts living inside you. Spend enough time around constant negativity, and suddenly your mind starts speaking a language you never taught it. People underestimate that. They think strength means surviving toxic situations forever. No. Strength is recognizing poison before it reaches your heart. Strength is walking away without needing applause. Strength is closing doors without standing outside them, wondering if you made the right choice. Because some doors were never protecting you. Some doors were cages. And the strange thing about cages is that people decorate them. They call them friendships. They call them loyalty. They call them obligations. They convince themselves that suffering is normal because everyone around them is suffering too. Then one day something shifts. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing understanding. You stop feeling guilty for choosing your own sanity. You start protecting your peace like it's something valuable because you finally understand it is. Your mind is where every dream begins. Your mind is where every decision is made. Your mind is the place where you spend every second of your existence. So why leave the doors open for anyone to walk inside wearing dirty shoes? Validation is a strange addiction. People don't even notice when they're hooked on it. They call it confidence. They call it being social. They call it just caring what people think. But underneath all those labels, it's something far more dangerous. It's dependence. A quiet need to be approved, to be liked, to be seen as enough by eyes that were never meant to define your worth. Look around. Most people are not living their lives. They are performing them. Every decision filtered through invisible judges in their head. What will they say if I do this? What will they think if I wear that? What if they laugh? What if they don't like me anymore? A life shaped by questions that don't even belong to them. A borrowed identity built from opinions of people who will forget their name in a few years. That's the trap. Validation turns simple actions into negotiations. You stop asking, is this right for me? And start asking, will they approve of this? And slowly, without even noticing, you start editing yourself. Your words become softer. Your opinions become safer. Your personality becomes something acceptable instead of something real. You become a version of yourself designed to avoid rejection rather than express truth. And here's the twist most people never see coming. The more you chase validation, the more it runs, because approval is never satisfied. It doesn't stay still. One moment someone likes you, next moment they don't. One moment they praise you, next moment they forget you. So you adjust again, you change again, you bend again, and every time you bend, you lose a little more of yourself trying to hold something that was never stable in the first place. People think being liked is power. It isn't. It's leverage for others. When your self-worth depends on external reactions, you are no longer in control of your own mind. Every comment becomes a trigger. Every silence becomes rejection. Every opinion becomes a measurement of your existence. That is not living. That is reacting. Real power starts when approval becomes irrelevant. Not hatred, not arrogance, irrelevance. When praise doesn't inflate you and criticism doesn't collapse you. When you stop checking if people understand you before you allow yourself to move forward. When your direction is no longer voted on by the crowd inside your head. Most people are terrified of that state because it means standing alone in their decisions. No applause, no backup noise, just clarity. And clarity can feel like emptiness at first, because all the distractions used to feel like company. But slowly, that emptiness turns into space. Space to think without interference. Space to choose without permission. Space to exist without explanation. The moment you stop chasing validation, something unsettling happens for others. They can't predict you anymore. You stop reacting the way they expect. You stop adjusting your personality based on the room. You stop needing their approval to continue your path. And people who relied on that control start feeling uncomfortable, because predictable people are easy to manage, but independent minds are not. So they test you. They question your choices. They try to pull you back into the version of you that needed them. But that version doesn't respond the same anymore. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once approval stops being the currency of your identity, silence becomes louder than applause. Energy is the only currency people spend without realizing it. Not money, not time, energy. Everything you do, every conversation you enter, every person you entertain, every argument you feed, it all takes something from you. And the strange part is, most people never track where it goes. They only feel it when it's gone. That heavy silence in the head, that tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, that emptiness after being around the wrong people too long. People think they are just tired. No, they're drained and they don't know what did it. Energy doesn't just disappear, it gets distributed. Every time you say yes when you mean no, it gets weaker. Every time you explain yourself to someone who already decided not to understand, it leaks. Every time you sit in conversations that go nowhere, but still demand your attention, it spills out of you quietly, like something small at first, then slowly enough to empty the whole system. That's why protecting energy is not a lifestyle choice. It's survival awareness. But most people don't protect it because they confuse availability with value. They think being constantly reachable makes them important. They think responding instantly makes them respectful. They think being present for everyone makes them loyal. But what they don't see is the cost. A mind that is always open to everyone becomes a mind that has no room for itself. And slowly, you stop hearing your own thoughts because they are buried under everyone else's noise. Not every person deserves access to your attention. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Not every message deserves your emotional response. But people forget this because they are trained to respond, not to choose. They react to everything like it is urgent, like every request is an order, like every emotional drop from someone else must be caught with their own hands. And that is how exhaustion becomes normal. You start waking up already tired. You start entering spaces already overstimulated. You start living in a constant background pressure that you cannot explain to anyone, because on the surface everything looks fine. You are doing okay. You are managing. But inside, there is no space left to breathe. Protecting your energy begins with something simple but uncomfortable. Distance. Not hatred, not anger. Distance. Because distance is the only way to see clearly. When you are too close to everyone's emotions, you become part of their chaos without even realizing it. You start carrying what was never yours. You start absorbing moods like they are responsibilities. You start becoming a storage place for other people's unresolved storms. And then they leave, and you are still holding the weather. There is a difference between helping people and absorbing people. One supports, the other destroys quietly. And most people don't notice the shift until they feel like they are constantly recovering from interactions instead of living through them. Energy protection is not about isolation. It's about selection. Choosing what enters your space. Choosing what stays in your mind. Choosing what gets access to your emotional system. Because not everything deserves a response. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every discomfort needs to be fixed immediately. Some things are meant to pass, but people interrupt that process by reacting to everything. And every reaction costs something. A thought, a focus, a piece of peace. And when enough pieces are gone, you don't feel broken. You just feel constantly incomplete without knowing what is missing until you realize it was never taken at once. It was taken slowly, in moments you never questioned. Silence is misunderstood. People treat it like emptiness, like absence, like something that appears when there is nothing left to say. But silence is not empty. Silence is loaded. It carries everything that was never spoken, everything that was avoided, everything that was too uncomfortable to face out loud. And most people don't realize they are afraid of silence because they are afraid of what it reveals about them. When the world is noisy, you don't notice yourself. There is always something to cover the mind. Music, messages, conversations, arguments, distractions, stacked one after another. Anything to avoid the moment where your thoughts are left alone, without interruption. Because the moment that happens, something else begins to speak. Not the outside world, the inside one. Silence is where truth stops hiding. People run from it without even realizing they are running. They keep their lives full, their schedules crowded, their attention scattered, because stillness feels too exposed. In silence, there is no audience, no validation, no noise to lean on, just thoughts that have been waiting for attention for too long. And that is where discomfort begins. Because silence does not lie, it reflects. Every ignored decision comes back into view. Every emotion that was pushed aside starts resurfacing. Every fear that was covered under activity starts breathing again. And suddenly, a person realizes they are not as distracted as they thought. They are just avoiding what they already know. That is why silence feels heavy for most people. Not because it is empty, but because it is full of things they never dealt with. Regret sits in it. Doubt sits in it. Questions they avoided answering. start forming again without permission, and there is no one else to interrupt them. People often confuse external quiet with internal peace. They think if the world around them slows down, they will finally feel calm. But silence outside does not guarantee silence inside. In fact, for many, it amplifies the internal noise, because now there is nothing competing with it. That is where growth begins, or avoidance continues. Some people sit with silence and start understanding themselves. They begin to notice patterns they never questioned. Why certain situations drain them. Why certain people feel heavy. Why certain choices repeat themselves even when they promise change. Silence becomes a mirror, not a threat, but others escape it immediately. They fill it, they break it, they replace it, because facing themselves feels like losing control. And control is what they use to avoid discomfort. So they stay busy, stay distracted, stay surrounded, as if motion itself can erase thought. It cannot. Silence always returns. It always waits. And when it finally gets space, it speaks louder than everything that was used to avoid it. That is why people fear being alone with their thoughts. Not because thoughts are dangerous, but because honesty is. In silence, there is no performance, no pretending, no curated version of identity, just raw awareness of where someone truly stands with themselves. And that awareness can be uncomfortable for those who built their identity on noise. Silence is not the absence of life. It is the removal of interference. It is the stripping away of everything that was covering reality. And once it arrives, it does not ask for permission. It simply exposes what has been there all along, waiting underneath everything else. Cutting unnecessary noise is not about becoming antisocial or shutting the world out completely. It is about understanding that not everything around you deserves space inside you. Most people live surrounded by noise they never question, conversations they don't care about, opinions they never asked for, problems that were never theirs, but somehow became part of their emotional load. And over time, that noise stops being external. It moves inward. It becomes thought. It becomes pressure. It becomes identity. Noise is not always loud. Sometimes it is subtle. A message you didn't need to respond to, but felt forced to. A debate you didn't need to enter, but couldn't ignore. A comparison you didn't want to make, but your mind made anyway. A comment that had no importance, but still stayed with you longer than it should have. That is how noise operates. It doesn't shout all the time. Sometimes it whispers until you start believing it. And the mind that listens to everything eventually hears nothing clearly. People think they are overwhelmed because life is too hard. But often it is because life is too full of irrelevant things. Too many inputs, too many voices, too many emotional distractions, pulling attention in different directions. And in that overload, clarity disappears. Decisions become slower. Focus becomes weaker. Peace becomes rare. Cutting noise means learning a painful skill. ignoring things that demand reaction but offer no value. Not every opinion deserves a reply. Not every situation deserves involvement. Not every emotional spark around you needs to become your fire. But most people react anyway, because reacting feels like control. Silence feels like loss of power. But in reality, reacting to everything is surrendering control of your own mind. Every unnecessary conversation you stay in costs attention. Every argument you entertain drains emotional energy. Every comparison you allow takes a piece of self-respect. And when you multiply that across days, weeks, years, the result is not obvious at first. It just feels like exhaustion without reason, like mental clutter without explanation. Noise builds slowly. It does not attack, it accumulates. That is why most people don't notice it until they can no longer focus deeply on anything. Their mind becomes scattered. Their attention jumps constantly. Their thoughts feel crowded, even in silence. And then they start searching for solutions outside themselves, not realizing the source was never external chaos alone, but internal acceptance of too much external input. Cutting noise is not only about people. It is also about habits. Scrolling without purpose. Consuming opinions without filtering them. Listening to every trend, every debate, every emotional wave passing through digital space, as if it all matters equally. It doesn't. But the mind doesn't know that unless it is trained to differentiate. And here is the uncomfortable part. Most noise feels important in the moment. That is why it survives. Because urgency is its disguise. But importance is not urgency, and urgency is not importance. A mind that cannot separate the two becomes reactive instead of intentional. It moves constantly, but doesn't necessarily move forward. It hears everything, but understands very little. When unnecessary noise is removed, something strange happens. At first, it feels empty, almost uncomfortable, because the mind is used to being occupied, used to stimulation, used to constant input. But slowly, in that emptiness, something else starts forming. Clarity, focus, awareness that was always there, but buried under everything else. And the more noise is removed, the more precise thinking becomes. Decisions take less effort. Emotions become easier to understand. Even silence starts feeling lighter because it is no longer competing with mental clutter. But the process requires discipline because noise always tries to return through people, through habits, through thoughts that pretend to be necessary but are only familiar. And familiar things are often mistaken for essential things until they are removed, and nothing important is actually lost. Choosing yourself first is not selfish, it is recognition. Most people misunderstand this because they were trained to believe that prioritizing others automatically makes them good, makes them loyal, makes them worthy. But what they were never taught is that a person who abandons themselves repeatedly does not become noble. They become empty. And emptiness is not kindness. It is depletion wearing a polite face. From the beginning, people are taught to adjust, to accommodate, to bend their needs so others feel comfortable. Say yes when it's inconvenient. Stay when it hurts. Explain when it is unnecessary. Apologize when there is nothing to apologize for. And slowly, without realizing it, the habit forms. The habit of disappearing from your own decisions. The habit of placing your existence behind everyone else's expectations. The habit of treating your own needs like they are optional. Choosing yourself first breaks that pattern. And when a pattern breaks, noise appears. People around you notice when you stop abandoning yourself. Not because you become louder, but because you become harder to access. The version of you that was always available begins to fade. The version that tolerated everything starts stepping back. And suddenly, what was once normal behavior becomes labeled as change, attitude, distance, selfishness. But those labels are only reactions from people who benefited from your absence in your own life. The truth is simple, but uncomfortable. Every time you choose someone else at the cost of yourself, you teach your mind that you come last. And what the mind learns repeatedly, it accepts as identity. So you begin to treat your own time as less important, your own emotions as negotiable, your own peace as something that can be sacrificed without consequence. But there is always a consequence. It just arrives later, in exhaustion that doesn't explain itself, in resentment that builds quietly, in silence that feels heavy, even when nothing is happening. Choosing yourself first is not about rejecting everyone. It is about removing automatic sacrifice. It is about noticing when your yes is not a choice but a reflex. It is about recognizing when your presence is being given out of fear of disappointing others rather than alignment with your own clarity. And that recognition alone changes the structure of how you move through the world, because when you stop defaulting to others, something unfamiliar happens. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly, not the filtered version shaped by expectations, but the original one that was always there underneath the noise of pleasing, adjusting, explaining. And that voice often quieter at first, not because it is weak, but because it was ignored. For so long it stopped competing. People will test this shift, not always intentionally, sometimes just out of habit. They will expect the old version of you to respond the same way. They will assume availability still exists where it used to. And when it doesn't, confusion appears. Because predictability is comfortable for others, even if it is costly for you. But choosing yourself first removes predictability from self-neglect. It introduces awareness, awareness of limits, awareness of energy, awareness of what feels aligned and what feels like slow erosion, disguised as responsibility. And once that awareness settles in, decisions stop being automatic. They start becoming deliberate. You pause where you used to rush. You question where you used to comply. You step back where you used to overextend, and in that space, something unfamiliar forms, a kind of internal stability that does not depend on external approval or constant emotional output toward everything around you. A stability that does not need permission to exist and does not require explanation to justify why your own place in your life cannot be treated as secondary anymore. While everything else continues, pulling attention outward endlessly, without pause or hesitation or need for validation from anything outside the boundary of your own mind. That is finally starting to reclaim, in the first place, that was never something to be ne'er, un per.